But you know, I thought they were so enthusiastic there and sweet and welcoming and excited about. They loved their stock exchange. I thought I should buy some stocks. I mean, I don't know why I'm fighting it. You know, the warm, friendly, fuzzy face. It was terrific.
I thought, first of all, I thought you've got great publicists to set that up. That was just a great.
I think. I mean, and in the halls of the stock exchange, as you go towards the floor, they have very high-tech glass walls that have many screens embedded in them, and they're all showing clips from this movie. And they all said, "We're dying to see this movie. We can't wait." Well, press the button now.
Well, it opens tomorrow, so we'll see what happens. And I checked the Dow Jones after your day there, and it seemed to do okay. It was stable. Everything went fine. So when it was a curious thing reading the book, the DeLillo novel, because reading it, knowing that you had adapted it into a film, there were so many sort of suggestions of Cronenberg films in the novel. There were just things about it. I guess the focus on cars and some of the sort of themes and imagery. I'm just wondering what your response was just when the book was given to you.
I didn't see any of that, but that's okay because I'm pretty much invisible to myself, honestly. Although that's something that Eric Packer might have said. That's true. Or Benno, played by Paul Giamatti.
Right.
I don't see that. I did respond to it really because of the dialogue, particularly. When it was proposed to me by the Portuguese producer Paulo Branco, I read it and I thought the dialogue is fantastic. And I had read several of Don's books, but I had not Cosmopolis. And his dialogue, it does remind me of Harold Pinter or David Mamet in that it's very stylized, but it's also the way people talk at the same time. There's a great tension between the stylization and the reality. But the thing about Mamet and Pinter, of course, is that they're playwrights, and you get to hear their dialogue spoken. And nobody's ever heard DeLillo's dialogue spoken, unless he, I guess, was reading it out at some reading that I don't know about. So I thought I would really love to hear this dialogue spoken by wonderful actors, and only in retrospect do I sort of feel that, in a weird way, and in a really good way, that is completing Don's process, because his dialogue is very hard and crystalline and slightly unreal and slightly disconnected, as his characters are. But at the same time, underneath it, there's great human despair and passion and obsessiveness. And I thought if you have an actual human being with a face and a voice speaking this stuff, that's going to bring the human element to the fore.
This is something we were talking about before, because the film has such an interesting tone to it. And I've seen it twice now. The first time I saw it, I had a response that it was had a very sort of almost deadpan humor to it. I just responded to the comedy in it. And then I found it much more emotional the second time. I mean, somehow I just sort of getting used to what the film was, and I saw how intimately you had filmed it.
You are my perfect audience.
Right, so...
Because it's easy to say that the film is cold, but I have to say that I find by the end of it, I find it quite emotional myself. And so obviously it pleases me if you have the same sort of dual kind of reaction to it.
We could run it again right now and see how people like it the second
time. But certainly Rob Pattinson, when he read it, he thought it was a comedy, and he loved the humor, and he saw that right away.
Yeah, but it's actually filmed in a very intimate. I mean, of course, it's filmed in an intimate style. You're in this enclosed space, so I can't.
Yeah, well, I like that. I mean, people talk about the challenge of shooting in a limo, and of course, it's not a real limo. It's kind of a Lego limo. It comes apart in about 25 pieces, and it gets split sideways and lengthwise, and the roof comes off, and it's on casters. It's not really. When we're inside it, we're not in a real limo, but. I realized that I actually like confined spaces, shooting in them. It's there's a kind of intensity and a compression that's forced on you, and it's it's like a haiku, it's like writing a sonnet. The rules are very tight, and it forces you to be inventive visually. I showed my crew the movie Lebanon, which takes place entirely inside an Israeli tank, and also Das Boot I suggested, because it's all in a submarine, and just to sort of encourage don't despair. There are really interesting things we can do here, especially if we build the limo in a way that it really can come apart, because you can really do a crane shot in it. So very tricky for the actors because they don't really. It's very, especially since I was shooting with very wide-angle lenses. So that means that if we're shooting with a long lens, the normal kind of portrait lens, I'm this far away, and you're in close-up. But with a tight lens, I'm here or even closer. And so the camera's really right in their face all the time. And even if there's somebody on beside the camera that they're doing the lines with, the camera's really present. So the machininess of it is very much in their face, literally and metaphorically. And I thought it was perfectly appropriate given, the kind of weird machine bubble that Packard builds for himself. It's really a tank. It is a tank. It is a submarine. It's also kind of a tomb, and it's also kind of a spaceship for him.
So could you talk a bit about I guess, about casting Robert Pattinson, what that meant, how that came about? It's an amazing performance, and I think in all of your films, I think this is the one where it's most reliant on one actor, who's I think he's in every scene.
Absolutely every scene, yeah. And even in a big, let's say, Tom Cruise movie or something, you won't find Tom in every scene,
Right.
And but this is a movie in which he is in every scene, which is what terrified him. Actually, it took me about 10 days to talk him into doing the movie. He knew it was good, and he, given his what kind of stardom he has, he gets a lot of offers for very boring, awful movies. Which, this is, by his own, it's not even an admission, he can say it. They're all very predictable and so on. When he got the script, he was really excited because it was so different and the dialogue was so, fantastic and surprising and strange. But he was afraid because he didn't want to be the guy who brought it down by not being good enough. And this often happens with actors, and some of them very experienced and very, lauded, and they think, God, am I really the right person for this? Is there not someone who would do it better? Would you not be better off with someone? And they're not just playing games and wanting you to say, oh yeah, you're the guy. They're serious about it. They're not sure. And for Rob, it was a gift for him to get this offer. This is what he felt. I wasn't feeling that in that way. But anyway, you need star power to get a movie financed. This movie cost 15 million euros, which is about $19 million. And that's about the top for an independent film that's done as a European, let's say Canada. This was a Canada-France co-production. €1 more than that, you're in a whole other category of government stuff, and it's very difficult to raise more money than that. So this was an expensive movie in independent terms, and you need star power, but that's always true. It doesn't really matter how small the budget is these days. You have to have star power.
I guess one of the things about the performance though is that it's intimate in that all the scenes are with other people. All of the scenes, they're not monologues. These are scenes where he's in an intimate, interesting relationship, whether it's sexual or the whole scene with Paul Giamatti is an incredibly intimate scene.
Yeah.
And you even make it a bit more so than in the novel, where I think that last image of them together and the relationship.
Yeah. Well, that also terrified him because he was thinking that he just wanted to do a sort of an ensemble piece where he was just one of many, and therefore he wasn't, carrying the whole movie and all that. And here he was carrying the movie in that sense, and secondly, every day there would be another actor in there with him, so there was no chance for him to establish a sort of a rhythm with an actor. But then he realized very soon that was actually an advantage for him because it was unpredictable, and he's a beautifully transparent actor who really responds to what's there in the reality of it, and so he would really respond to the surprises that the other actors would bring to him. For example, the very first scene in the limo with Jay Baruchel, playing Shiner, Rob was totally shocked by how emotional that performance was, and how bare and how vulnerable he was playing it, and it took him completely by surprise because he hadn't anticipated that kind of performance, and it immediately altered what he did. So it's great.
One other thing I want to ask you, then we'll open it up to the audience. But there's this whole aspect in the film of like the old world aspect of cities. You know, the way that you have like the sleek modern city, but it's existing along with sort of the decaying old city. This sort of had a kind of flavor of, you know, sort of old ethnic New York being there but disappearing in a way.
Yeah, and I think it has actually, because you know, it's basically 47th Street is where it's supposed to play, and the 47th Street that DeLillo wrote about is almost non-existent now. All the places, the Mercantile Library and some other things that,
like the Gotham bookmark.
They've all disappeared. So even if we actually shot it in New York, we'd have to fake it anyway because that stuff isn't there. It was all shot in Toronto, with green screen and some what we call plates that were shot in New York for Times Square and so on.
But you made a decision to be very abstract about the city. I mean, it's, you know, we see right away, you know, when you see it's Union, you know, you see the Union Station, I guess, in Toronto.
Yeah.
So there's no pretense that you're doing New York. Really.
Some pretense, some failed pretense. No, because I mean, I did, you know, the basics. I mean, the license plates are New York license plates, and the street signs are New York street signs. But weirdly enough, things like that you normally worry about, what we call street furniture, things like lampposts and parking meters and stuff, they're very similar. In fact, the parking meters, you know, where you put your credit card in, you get a slip and you put it in your car. They're the exact same make and color and brand and everything as in New York as they are in Toronto. So we didn't even have to change that. It was perfect.
Okay, let's open it up to questions. So raise your hand and I'll repeat. So I guess what was the question, just if you could talk about those paintings, the one that's sort of abstract one in the beginning, and then I'll let you say.
Well, sure. You know, you have a guy, a billionaire, who is an art. He appreciates art. He sees in the Rothkos something that he wants, you know, and the fact that it's the Rothko Chapel suggests some kind of religious connection for him. Is it peace? Is it serenity? Is some kind of transcendence that will get him out of his own body and his own life? But being the kind of guy he is, the only way he can think to acquire that is to buy it. I mean, that's what he does. When you want something, you buy it. That is the way it works with him. And even that is an abstraction, because though he's dealing with billions of dollars every day trading, he never really touches actual money. So it's all abstract. So because of that, we decided to bookend the film with Pollock, which he is not mentioned in the movie or the book directly, but obviously comes, you know, from the same era. But the Pollock is, you're seeing it being created, and it's sort of where he is at the beginning, kind of agitated and tricky and active and constantly moving, and by the end we have the Rothkos, which is a kind of serenity, a kind of acceptance, a kind of peace. Now it's interesting to note that both those artists basically committed suicide. So I wasn't thinking of that at the time, but I thought, well, you know, it's perfect for Eric Packer to be drawn to artists whose acquiring of peace involves self-destruction.
Okay. And way back there.
You've worked with Robert as an actor. Would you ever, sometime down the road, consider collaborating with him on a screenplay?
Would you consider collaborating with Robert Pattinson on a screenplay?
Well, it's true that Rob is, you know, actively looking to develop some projects himself, and I think he's, you know, he's sort of feeling that out right now I think a lot of actors who had some commercial success but find it difficult to find projects that really excite them, try to develop them on their own. But he hasn't really proposed a particular screenplay to me. I really would love to work with him again, and in particular, I think he'd be terrific with Viggo, two of my favorite actors. I'd love to get him.
It's pre-sold here, so
yeah,
it's not your
I know,
distributor.
and there is a script called Maps of the Stars, which was written by Bruce Wagner, who's just got a new book out called Dead Stars, and he's a terrific writer and a close friend. And I've been trying to get Maps to the Stars made for years and years. And both Viggo and Rob have said that there are roles that they would play, and I'd love to. We're trying to get that movie made. It's very hard to get anything made that's difficult, that's unconventional, that's not just. It's always been like that to a certain extent. Right now, it's very extreme. Very hard to get a movie made that is anything but mainstream.
Well, yeah, I mean, that aspect of casting Pattinson as a big star, big commercial star. How did that affect the financing of this film, and then what people expected of it? I mean, because this is very much a film that's true to.
It's sort of it's strangely similar to what happened with Viggo, because Viggo became a star because of Lord of the Rings, and because of that, he could then be the lead in History of Violence, the first movie I did with him. We all know, and he knew, it was very obvious, that without Lord of the Rings, I couldn't have had him be the lead in History of Violence, because he wouldn't be enough of a star to support that kind of budget. And it's the same with Rob. I mean, Twilight has made him a star, but he's interested in, he's extremely knowledgeable about cinema. I mean, I ran into him talking to Juliette Binoche about French cinema, and a really, very exotic kind of films that they were talking about, very obscure. But any movie, you need a star, because you have to attract financiers, and when it's an independent film like this, you're putting together a kind of Frankenstein quilt. That's kind of reminding me of the way we built the limo, actually. It's modular, there are 24 or 25 entities, financial entities, that went into the financing of this movie. Some of them are French distributor money, some of it is telefilm money from Canada, so you've got government money. We have a genuine French billionaire who invested in this movie. I want to talk about him too. So there's private money, there's government money, there's distributors' money, and they all have to sort of interlock, and they all have to get their, get up and take some profit if there is any profit in a certain order and all that. Very complex. But the one thing you need, they need the reassurance that there's somebody visible in the movie, or more than one usually, who will support the movie with his or her stardom. So it's no accident that I have Juliette Binoche and Mathieu Almeric in the movie, because it's a Canada-France co-production. It doesn't. I could choose any actors from Europe at all, because the way the European Union works is that they all count as sort of the same. So Canada, France, Canada, France. So Rob Pattinson is equivalent to Juliette Binoche in that they are Europeans. So I could only have one American in this movie, even though it's set in America. That's the irony of movie making these days, and that's Paul Giamatti. Now, fortunately, New York is such a multicultural city that it goes by kind of unnoticed, I think. But that's the.
I was wondering why Jennifer Aniston wasn't there. So now why Jennifer Aniston wasn't in the film. Yeah. So so I was actually wondering how you responded to this theme about money, the relation between money and art. I mean, Eric is sort of in a way has the soul of an artist, but is dealing with money. You've always had to deal with multi-million-dollar productions, and deal with money in a way to create your art. So I was just wondering if there was a personal connection to the theme of money.
Well, I guess it's so much business as usual for me that I wasn't really thinking of it as connecting me thematically to it.
Yeah.
Because I went through the same process not long ago with The Dangerous Method about Freud and Jung, and there wasn't exactly that connection, although there was certainly a psychoanalytic connection. So no, I wouldn't say that it's an interesting art and money. And certainly when you think of Jackson Pollock and you think of Rothko and you think of, Van Gogh, I mean, artists who are poor or struggling in their lives, and then when they're after they're dead, their art is worth astronomical amounts of money. It's very ironic and very strange, but not, as I say, not thematically not compelling.
Okay. Question right down here.
I'm curious if you had any contact with Mr. DeLillo, both in the making of, and also if you will watch the movie.
If you could talk about your contact with DeLillo during the making of, and I guess then his response to the film.
Yeah. DeLillo, he doesn't, he doesn't do the internet or email, so you have to fax him. And he writes on an Olympia, an old Olympia portable typewriter. So he's a little hard to get in touch with, and I mostly connected with him through the producer, Paolo, who would then fax him. But ultimately, I did meet him in Estoril in Portugal, because the producer of the film also runs that festival. And it was terrific. I had written the script, and he had read the script. The script was written before I actually went into production for A Dangerous Method, so that's why the production was sort of ready to go when I had finished that film. So this was my Woody Allen moment, doing 2 films back to back, one a year. And I've only done it 2 years, and he does it like for 40 years, so it's a little different. But it was exciting for while it lasted. So DeLillo had read the script, but we were still maybe quite a way away from production. And he said, one of the first things he said to me was, he really liked the script and he loves the movie, so that makes me very happy, obviously. And he said, for example, I was very curious to know to see how you were going to handle Benno's journal. And I was interested to see that you handled it by leaving it out. and see that in the book, Benno, who is the character played by Paul Giamatti, writes a journal, and it's a chapter, that's his journal, or a couple of chapters actually, and it comes very early on, and you are then in Benno's head. And he actually says, I've got Eric Packer lying dead on the floor beside me now, I killed him. And you're not sure whether he's telling the truth or not, because he's anything but a reliable narrator. But I felt that the journal was not possible to do in cinema. This is an interesting thing. I mean, I've said it many, many times. In order to be faithful to the book, you have to betray the book. And by that I mean you have to accept the difference between the 2 media, literature and cinema. They are very, very different. They're very related, but they're very different. And there are certain things that are easy or relatively simple to do, let's say, even in a bad novel, which you cannot do at all in cinema, even in a very good film. And I mean things like inner monologue, where you have a guy walking down the street, but he's thinking about his wife, and he's thinking about his car keys, and he's thinking about his business. And you can do that very easily. And you can't really do it at all in a movie, Often you see what I think of as a kind of admission of failure, which is you have a voiceover. Have somebody reading you the novel while you're watching the movie, like you're some kid, you want to sleep. And I think, okay, so you haven't figured out how to make the movie. So, I think what you have to do is you accept that the 2 things are different. You will not translate the book to the screen. There is no dictionary that will give you a translation like that. You are creating a new entity that is very related to the book, but is not a replica of the book. It's not like a movie version of the book. And so I felt that the only way I could have done Benno's journal really was to have Paul reading his journal, over shots of him scribbling or whatever. And I just felt that was wrong for what I could see the movie was going to be. But so I said no, actually I didn't, because I hadn't cast Paul Giamatti at that point. But what I say then is, instead of Benno's journal, I give you Paul Giamatti. I give you his face, his voice, his eyes, the way he moves. And that's the trade-off. You don't get the journal, but you get Paul. Yeah. And also, just to further, Don was in Cannes when we presented the movie there, and he did face the international press. It can be kind of terrifying for a writer. I remember doing it with J.G. Ballard, who was terrific, but afterwards he said, this is a little too exciting for a novelist, David. The pressure. He really wanted to get back to Shepperton and sit down and write another novel. So Don was there, and he traveled with us to a couple of places to do publicity for the film, which I think for him was, he had to. It was a stretch for him because it's not something he normally does. He's kind of shy.
Could you just say a word about your writing process with the script? Because I think that this was the first script that you did solo since existence. Is that true? And it was also written in a very compressed amount of time.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's not a boast or a brag or anything. It's just that I wrote the script in 6 days, which is unusual for me. I didn't really think I was writing a script. That might have helped. I basically was thinking, okay, is this really a movie? Because there's so much in the novel that's inside the head of Eric Packer, and that's very kind of metaphysical and disconnected and disembodied and so on. Stuff that I knew could not be in the movie, that I think of as innately literary and therefore not cinematic, and you have to accept that you're going to leave it out. So, okay, well, if you leave that out, do you have a movie? So I literally transcribed the dialogue. It took me 3 days. I typed into my computer the dialogue and put it into the format of a screenplay. And then for the next 3 days, I filled in the scene descriptions and so on. And there were things I left out and things that I shifted a bit. Mm-hmm. But basically, the dialogue in the movie is 100% from the book, in the same sequence and the same amount, density, and everything else. And I read it and I said, okay, is this a movie or not? And I said, yeah, not only is it a movie, it's a movie I really want to do, and here's a screenplay. So miraculously appeared. And it never changed. It didn't change one bit. And actually Rob, who's, he's had his Twilight experience in his sort of Water for Elephant studio, making studio movies, basically said he had never had a film experience like this, in that in film, when you're shooting a movie, every time you make a change to the script, the color of the pages, of the new pages, changes. There's a whole sequence. There's a green pages, blue pages, yellow pages, and it indicates to the crew that there have been changes in the script. You want to make sure that they see it, so the color change. He said this was the only movie he ever worked on that the pages stayed white the whole because we've never made any changes.
Right. Okay, right down here.
Well, let me put it this way. When Paul met Rob, he said to me, why is he doing a weird British accent? Is he trying to psych me out or something? I said, no, he's English. And it's because his American accent is, totally convincing, and he's been doing it for a long time. So that's one of the things that I needed from an actor. If he was not from New York, could he do a convincing New York accent? Not a broad, just subtle one. In fact, the accent he does is very close to Don DeLillo's accent, actually. So Samantha was on top of everything else doing an accent, and as I say, a very beautiful performance. She's lovely to work with, and really there 3 days maybe. That's about it. I mean, most of the actors were just in for 2 or 3 days. Matthew Elmer was in there. He's the pastry assassin. 1 day.
Okay. Right over here.
I was wondering, for a director who's so associated with the body, if this seems to sort of almost function like in the negative, the abstraction of the body out of the world in terms of like the digital universe and capital, etc. I wonder if that was a draw for you at all, or if that figured in terms of your preoccupations with the body.
Well, we're talking about the preoccupations with the body in my movies. Honestly, every director is obsessed with the body, whether he knows it or not, because that's what you photograph. That's when you shoot most, you should be photographing the person's face, if not the entire body. It's a very physical medium, and yet it too seems kind of abstract. I think that's the that's the paradox.
Yeah.
I don't think I'm the only director who's obsessed with the body. Sometimes I just make it a little more obvious than other people. But, I mean, Rob's face is the movie, you know. I mean, I'm photographing him from every possible angle. And I'm using the way he moves and what he does with his face and his voice, which I also think of as part of the body. I've done some acting myself, not a lot, but some. And I think the first thing that struck me when I tried it the first time was that although you're only about 10 feet away from where you are as a director, it's a completely different ballgame. Because when you're a director, nobody cares what you look like. You know, you can have cold sores and your hair can be a wreck, and you can be, you know, as long as you can croak out action and then you can still direct. But when you're an actor, it's your body. That's it. That you're right out there, vulnerable, and it's your body is your instrument, and that's why actors are very, concerned with the things that are on their body or on top of their body, their hair. It's not vanity. I mean, that's the instrument they have to work with. So, to me, film is a very body-oriented art form. Really, that's what I think of it as. So I don't think of this movie as being different that way, though I do know what you mean, because so much of this movie is about abstraction. I mean, the money as something that used to be physical is now an abstraction to these people. Certainly on the New York Stock Exchange it is. You know, it's just all digital. There are tons of screens, more screens than in Eric's limo. You know? And the idea that things that used to be produced, and that's how you made money, Henry Ford, and you make cars, and now so much of money is created in a totally abstract way, so abstract, like with things like credit default swaps and stuff, which, believe me, I don't know what they are. And I don't own any either. They're so abstract that sometimes the people who have created them they don't know what they are either. They can't control them. They don't know how much they're worth or what they should sell them for or anything like that, because in a way they don't exist. So the movie is a bit about abstraction in that way, and then you have Eric who uses his limo to abstract him from the life of the city, and the city becomes an abstraction outside the windows. I really made a decision early on that we would, whenever Eric's in the limo, we are in the limo. When we see the city only from the point of view of the limo, we never go outside it unless he's outside it. And that was to suggest that sort of abstracted life that he's living.
Okay. Back there.
Yeah, I had a question. Towards the end of the movie, it was difficult for me to tell whether Eric was achieving transcendence of himself or he was completing a downward spiral of self-destruction. And I wonder how you would untangle those.
Okay, so the question is about the ending, whether Eric is transcending, achieving transcendence somehow at the end, or if it's the end of a downward spiral.
Yeah. Well, you have to think about death, and you have to think about whether it's the end, or is it transcendence, or is it the end of something, And I think the movement of Eric in the movie is definitely at first an attempt to, he wants a haircut, and but he doesn't just want a haircut. He wants a haircut from the barber who gave him his first haircut when he was a little kid, and who used to cut his father's hair. And so he's really going back into his past. I mean, that's the trip that he's on. And I see it as, on that trip, he's kind of deconstructing the Eric Packer that he has become, and in the hopes of reassembling one from scratch, from the beginning when he was a kid. And okay, let's go back to the past when I was a kid and live that life again in a different way, so that I can become a different person. And then he tries that. And I thought that Rob's performance in the barbershop was extraordinary, really. He really becomes a child. He becomes vulnerable and he becomes sweet. And I mean, it's really quite touching, I thought. And that's him being himself as a child. But it doesn't quite work. It can't quite work, and he has to get out of there. And he can't even let his haircut finish. He has to get out of there. And he has to try to destroy his life in some other way then. That's sort of the way I see it. And suicide certainly is a kind of transcendence in terms of getting out of your own life.
you made him alone in a way. I mean, there was like an interesting decision you made to really specifically end the marriage. I mean, in the book, that was like one sort of small invention that was kind of interesting.
Yeah, there in the book there is a scene of reconciliation between Eric and his wife, and it's a scene that I felt was a fantasy of Eric's, and that it wasn't real. And I felt that it would not work at all on the screen. I mean, movies are, however surreal they might be, there's also a certain literalness to them that is unavoidable. And this scene was a scene of the limo comes across a film shoot in the night in the streets of New York where there are 150 naked extras lying around on the roads and sidewalks in a kind of weird naked orgy scene. And Eric decides to join these extras and jumps out of the limo and takes off all his clothes and lies down, and lo and behold, he's lying next to his wife, Elise, who's also naked lying. And they, that's where they have their reconciliation, and they get back together, sort of.
Yeah.
And obviously, I mean, you can tell by the way I'm talking about it, I didn't feel it would ever be convincing, even given the sort of, shall we say, heightened reality that the movie takes place in. I didn't feel that this could ever work on screen at all. It's so unrealistic that such a thing could happen that way with no police and no where were the second ADs, hurting the extras, and where were the people taking photos and gawking at all these naked people lying around? So I didn't think it would work. So I really felt okay that was Eric's fantasy of reconciliation. In fact, a kind of very juvenile, sweet, sort of adolescent fantasy of that. And I didn't therefore have any qualms about leaving it out.
So actually, I think the most sexually intimate scene is that amazing proctological exam, which I read that and said, how is he going to do that and make it?
It's hard. Finding the right camera angle was difficult.
Yeah.
Well, the funny thing is also kind of charming is that Rob has said in interviews that he had no idea that an prostate exam takes about 10 seconds. So he didn't know that this was realistic, this 6 minute. I said, Rob, if you ever have a prostate exam in 6 minutes, your doctor's up to something serious.
A good pointer for everybody here. Okay, just a few more, so we'll take one over here.
Yeah, I had a question about the story seems so relevant to current events. I was curious if when you were filming it, was it during the Occupy movement? Did that influence production decisions?
So the question was about this film is so relevant, and the book was written in 2003, and it sort of feels like very predictive. And then you made changes. But when was this written and filmed in relation to the Occupy movement?
Yeah, I mean, when I first read the book, and wrote the script, maybe 3 years ago, and Occupy Wall Street wasn't happening really then, but it certainly was happening when we were shooting and in pre-production. And beyond that, I mean, at a certain point while we were shooting, I got a text from Paul Giamatti saying, "You're not going to believe this, but Rupert Murdoch just got a pie in the face." And he had just shot the scene where Eric gets a pie in the face. So even to that kind of detail, but frankly, it had no effect on our shooting. I mean, our riots in the street are perhaps a little more obviously anti-capitalist. I think you could make a case for the Occupy movement is not being quite anti-capitalist. It would just like to realign capitalism so that more people got more of the money. Whereas in our movie, there's a quote that, well, it's an allusion. It's not a direct quote to Karl Marx's Communist Manifesto. The manifesto begins, "A specter is haunting Europe, the specter of communism," and Marx wasn't. He was saying that in a positive way vis-a-vis communism, saying this is good that it's haunting Europe. Here we have specters haunting the world as the specter of capitalism, and it has a very different spin and a different tone. So even to that extent, I think the two movements, the one in the movie and Occupy Wall Street, they're not identical, I don't think. On the other hand, what he says, what Eric says is he said, 2 hours ago, a global movement, now what? Nothing. Fizzles out in the movie and disappears. And I don't know if the outrage that spawned Occupy Wall Street is going to dissipate quite so quickly. I think it won't.
Okay, take one more back there. Go ahead. Yeah.
So how often did you impose your own interpretation of the subtext of the dialogue versus allowing the actors to discover meanings on their own?
Okay, so how often did you impose your own subtext in the dialogue versus allowing the actors to find it?
Well, I really, in a way, don't think about subtext in terms of dialogue when we're actually doing it. I mean, we really played it like actual people reacting to each other. And I don't rehearse, so I had no idea what was going to come out of anybody's mouth until I heard it, and I had never heard the dialogue spoken until we were actually shooting it. I react in it's a very sculptural, spontaneous process for me, making a movie. I don't do storyboards, as I said. I don't know what the movie's totally going to be. You do a lot of preparation because you have to design the limo. Of course, one of the things I did was put the seat, Eric's seat, in the middle of the rear of the limo like a throne instead of, that wasn't described in the book. So you've done a lot of prep that sets some things up. But once you're starting to shoot, it's a surprise, I mean, I really didn't know what was going to happen. And so, yes, I let the actors do what they want to begin with, absolutely. And some of them are more prepared. Some of them have spent a lot of time. Rob said that Sarah Gata, who plays Elise, said to him, so how did you prepare for the role? And he said that totally freaked him out, and he had to stumble out of the limo and go talk to himself for a while, because he hadn't prepared at all. She was very prepared. But prepared meant, but you see, it didn't matter in the actual playing of it. It was as though there were just two people saying things they had never said before, you see. And so you don't want to over-prepare, in a way. And especially since it is like a tennis match, you don't know how hard the guy's serve is going to be, because you're playing some guy who's ranked 133rd, and you've never seen him play before. You have to play what your opponent or your compatriot is, So the subtext, the analysis, all of that comes after the fact. I mean, I'm enough of an academic, I guess, that I could write an essay on this movie and show how it connects to all of my other movies, for example. But when I'm making the movie, it's as though I've never made another movie. I mean, I don't think about them. And likewise with Rob, sure, we need Twilight to get the movie financed, but when we're shooting the movie at night, nobody else around, just us, the crew, it's wonderful, because all we're doing is making the movie. There's no world around us. We are in the limo. We are in our bubble.
Okay. Well, the film opens